Hello to you who've gathered cozily here this evening. This is Well-Being and Good Living. In case you don't know, it's the first of 4 evenings to think about experience of university life and afterwards, to think deeply, range widely, talk openly. Everybody knows the shock effect of college years. We know it's not just about academic demand or getting mono, or falling in love, falling out of love. It's about all of those things. It's about learning how many-sided you are and learning how vulnerable you are on each of the many sides. The Sorensen Institute for the Study of British Object Relations and the Institute of the Humanities and Global Cultures jointly sponsor the 4 sessions we're going to have, but it will be the speakers and then the people who take the time to gather who will be the center of each of the events. We're going to have short introductory statements each time, one from an undergrad, one from a faculty member, and then someone who tends the mental health of the young and the not so young. Always the talks are there to stir up ideas, but everything will depend on the conversation that follows. Today, because it's the first day and ceremonial, we picked this room, the auditorium that's Minor Hall. The next occasions will be in open grounds around the table. But wherever we are, it's just going to be a chance to think about how we thrive in university life, how we flourish and fail to flourish, how we face obstacles in the way of thriving. When the talks are over, there'll be any questions, comments, engagements, and conversation. So we're ready to go. This is the second time recently that I've had the chance to introduce Charlie Tyson. I don't think it will be the last. He's out there and he's up for it. He thinks, Charlie does, about everything. And now he writes every day for the Cavalier Daily, which is the deal, being the executive editor. You write every day. It's an honor and a thrill. Aaron knows all about it. But it's a heavy weight to carry for a year. And now, Charlie, you get to show the world every morning what runs through your head and leaps through your prose. You're majoring in political and social thought, also in English. But you have a third major you didn't know about, Charlie, and that's possibility. I see you as majoring in possibility. So whenever you talk, and whatever you show that more is possible. Let's welcome Charlie.
Professor Levenson, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm so happy to have the opportunity to speak tonight. So I'm here to talk to you guys about growing up. And as I raced over here with one eye on my watch, I thought very much about 2 qualities that characterize being youthful. One is spontaneity, and the other is foolishness. And I think I've exhibited both tonight already, and I look forward to exhibiting more as I go on. So I'm here to talk tonight about growing up in your 20s. But what I'd like to start with is our 50s. So my dad was born in 1955. And when I was in high school, I had the privilege to see him go through what some might call a midlife crisis. Luckily, us Tysons are a mild-mannered bunch, so he directed his ever-sharpening awareness of his own mortality into one activity: grilling. He loved to grill. The problem was, at least at first, he was not very good at grilling. And the first night, we had a Tyson grilled dinner. I remember it so vividly, because I became aware of my own mortality when I sat down at that table. The food was burnt on the outside, raw on the inside, and tasted like charcoal and chemicals. We were all very supportive, we were happy for him, we were just glad that he was finding an outlet, but I barely survived the meal. So, what does my dad's foray into outdoor cooking have to do with growing up? So, I think that growing up, and this is sort of a crude metaphor, but growing up is a little bit like getting grilled. We're more than lumps of meat, or so we hope, but the process of cultivation is a long one. And sometimes, even though we might be well seasoned and a little wrinkled and sometimes a bit overcooked, we always retain a sort of raw, meaty core inside of us. of feeling and emotion and imagination. And I think that what this says to me as a recently turned 21-year-old is that the process of cultivating persons, whether it's through education or through relationships or through a job, is one that needs to be taken seriously, and it's a responsibility that we need to undertake methodically. Otherwise, you get people who are burnt on the outside and raw on the inside. And what I mean by that is that often, and this is something I've noticed at UVA and at other institutions, the process of coming into adulthood is one that's focused more on appearances and what's outside. And we might have this professional veneer, and then it's sort of like living in two separate planes at the same time, where we have our work week where we're professionals and we're adults, and then we also have a weekend where we're youthful. And I think that consistency is a marker of true adulthood, which is why I think that being youthful is something that we can retain through our 20s in a way that can be useful. So, what do I mean by this exactly? I mean that while I'm part of what some people call an extended adolescence, where as we go through our 20s, we don't hit the same marks of adulthood that we used to. I'm not married, I don't have a job, and I don't have a degree. Well, I'm on the younger side of 20s, so it's a little different. But at the same time, I'm skeptical of growing up too quickly. So what I'd like to suggest is that the process of growing up shouldn't be a situation where you sort of just get thrown on the fire and expect to meet a certain set of demands. Instead, it should be more of a slow roast or a rotisserie roast, where you're seasoned and you're prepared not just for the superficialities of adulthood, not just for a career or for certain standards of behavior at cocktail parties, but you possess a true sort of inner maturity, which entails honoring your obligations to yourself and to other people, and treating other people with respect. Those things, I think, are markers of true adulthood, more so than your job or your marriage or lack thereof. So, as I enter my defining decade, I'd like to keep in mind that the adulthood we want to attain isn't just a professional one, but a moral one. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. And the second person I get to introduce is, well, me. I've never done this before. I've never had to introduce I'm not really going to do it. But I was wondering, realizing the structure of the evening, how I would introduce myself. And I realized I would be, if I were to do it, acidly self-critical, but also self-accepting. I think that's where I am now. I am highly critical of myself, but I'm tolerant of who I've become. And in that spirit, I will say these words. We had competing titles for the evening. Before it was about growing up and getting older, the rough early title was The Parents in Your Head. I liked that one because my parents were always in my head. They're in my head now. I'm looking at you, but I'm saying hi to my mom and hi to my dad. They're my little title for a few minutes, reflecting on my growing up. Because this growing up, as I see it in the university, is always something that catches you by surprise. By the time you're in your second year, you feel you've doubled your age, and you feel so young at the same time. If you think of them right now, you think of your mom and dad, say, sitting at a table, looking at one another, and you're somewhere in the room, you realize, I believe, how easy it is to summon pictures of your parents. Because they're always so near. They're perched on your shoulder. They're there on your ear. They burrow in your head. I was a pre-med English major. My parents wanted nothing more than for me to be a respectable doctor in Trenton, New Jersey. It was the entire truth of my life for them. All 4 years of college, I couldn't bring myself to say, no way, that's not for me. So I took physics and chemistry, biology. I took organic chemistry. I built 3D molecules in the bathtub, and I don't regret it. It's good to know the language of amino acids and polypeptides when you interpret a poem or understand the fate of the culture. It's good to know as much as you can. But it was such a transaction with my parents. It was a negotiation every day, whether I talked to them or not. Sometimes they were overt and heavy and public. We'll take out a loan to help you get through med school, they said. But if you go to graduate school in English, you're on your own. Bad strategy. It made it such an easy call for me. In grad school, I could be poor but pure. I could be defiant, and I was so proud not to give in. Most of the time, they didn't make it so heavy. They just implied things. But you know how it is with your parents. You can tell it through their sighs. I don't blame them. I don't blame myself. But I think that being a child and now being a parent, living through those years and then thinking about coming over this evening, I recollected the coolest word in the English language, and that word is disappointed, as in, I'm disappointed in you. It's so much worse than, don't ever do that again, or think of my feelings for a change, or even, I'm so furious. That's because disappointed in you sounds as if something has settled in and rooted down. When a parent says they're disappointed in a child, they're not saying, don't worry, it'll be over in a minute. They're saying it's arrived. It's here. This is what I feel for you. Disappointment until further notice. Part of what makes it so moving to me is that by the time you get to college and you feel your life is changing minute by minute, all you want is to be all right with them. You want the opposite of disappointment. You want waves of acknowledgement, understanding, approval, love without conditions. I think that's why students still keep, always and ever, trying to please parents, to propitiate them. They were the original approvers and disapprovers, and they always hold that place. We want to know that they're not holding back, wishing we'd be more practical, shaking their heads. We can't quite get over the longing for the affirmation. I was at Greenberry's last month, Greenberry's in Alderman, lining up for latte, and a student was behind me, talking on the phone to her mom. Obviously a first year, very obviously. I wasn't listening, but I wasn't not listening. And then she said, well, gotta go. And oh, I got a 90 on the Arabic test. I don't think I'll ever forget that moment. Because I'm glad you got a 90, whoever you were. It's a good grade. But it's not the 90 that made me melt, and I melted. It was the end of, slipping it in there at the end, trying not to make a big deal of it. It was pride, but even more, it was a gift to the parent. More than she was happy, that's how I heard it anyway. More than she was happy, she wanted her mom to be happy. It's just so complicated though, isn't it? We want them to be happy and reassured, our parents. We want it for them, but we also want it for ourselves. We want their happiness to come radiating back at us. I was thinking about the Greenberry's incident today, and I was thinking about our language, how we use the expression happy for, as in I'm happy for you. And then I thought how we need another expression. We need to be able to say, I'm happy at you. Because I think behind a lot of what we want is just that from the P's when we're away at school. I mean, think how naturally we use at in angry at. I'm angry at you. My parents are angry at me. It's so targeted and directed. But happiness can be aimed when you make your parents happy through something you've done or been or met, you want to feel they're happy at you, right at you, that it's coming from them to you. Because even when it's clicking along most happily at the university, and I hope it's clicking along happily for all of you, there's always a wound. It's the wound of difference. Different generations, different times of life. It's a separation that even love can't heal. It shouldn't heal. They're the parents at home. You're the kid at college. They don't know how hard it is to learn Arabic. Or maybe they do. Not the way you do. The most difficult thing of all, I feel, is that you can be loving and respecting your parents for all your worth and still realize they don't know. They can't know your life as you live it now. They only think they know. That's the confusion and the pain. You need the wound of separation. I think that's what the university years teach. You're of your parents, but you'll never be near them in the same way again. It's hard, but it's good too. It's hard and it's good to know that when you differ with them, the parents in your head, you can still trust yourself. You're the one leading your life. Faced with the hard choices, after they've been patiently and earnestly considered, I believe that you get 3 votes. Your parents just there too. And still and always, it's good to reach across the wound, to love across the wound of separation, to give them the chance, to give you the gift. You need to let them be happy at you. So you can say, and oh, I got a 90 on the Arabic quiz. And oh, thank you all for listening. This is how it goes, but it's kind of fun for me to play different roles. It's so good to have Meg Jay here now. The timing is right. Her book is out and everywhere. There's so much conversation swirling around. There's lots of interest and attention. It's a subject of our time. It's called, as many of you already know, the defining decade. Why your 20s matter and how to make the most of them now. Meg is going to give a TED Talk coming out of the book, and tonight we get to hear a first version of what she's thinking of saying. When I told Charlie here that Meg Jay was going to speak, he got very excited. More than usually excited about the possibility. He said his mom was reading the book. Meg Jay is a clinical psychologist here in Charlottesville. She writes out of her experience with people in and through their 20s. Young people who aspire and struggle, fight and flail, who break down or break free or both. I'm pleased, and like Charlie, I'm excited. Please welcome Meg Jay.
Can y'all hear me in the back? Okay. I'm going to start tonight with a story about my 20s. You started with a story about 50s. I'm not in my 50s, but I'll do a sort of reversal and start with a story about when I was in my 20s. So when I was in my 20s, I saw my very first psychotherapy client. I was a PhD student in clinical psychology at Berkeley, and she was a 26-year-old woman named Alex. So Alex walks into her first session. She has on jeans and a big slouchy shirt, and she drops onto the couch in my office and kicks off her shoes and tells me she's there to talk about her boyfriend. Now, when I heard this, I was so relieved. My classmate for her first patient had just been assigned an arsonist on probation, and I got a 20-something who wanted to talk about guys. This I thought I could handle, but I didn't handle it. With the funny stories that Alex would bring to session, it was easy for me to just nod my head while we kicked the can down the road. 30's the new 20, Alex would say, And as far as I could tell, she was right. Work happened later, marriage happened later, kids happened later, even death happened later. 20-somethings like Alex and I had nothing but time. But before long, my supervisor pushed me to push Alex about her love life. I pushed back. I said, sure, she's dating down. She's sleeping with a knucklehead. But it's not like she's going to marry the guy. And then my supervisor said, not yet, but she might marry the next one. Besides, the best time to work on Alex's marriage is before she has one. That was my personal and professional aha moment, and because of that, I decided to specialize in 20-somethings. I've taught thousands of 20-somethings at Berkeley and the University of Virginia. I've worked with hundreds of 20-somethings behind closed doors in my private practice. And guess what I found out along the way? I found out that 30 is actually not the new 20. I found out that far from being an irrelevant downtime, your 20s are a developmental sweet spot that comes only once, and not enough 20-somethings know about this. There are 50 million 20-somethings in the US right now. We're talking about 15% of the population, or 100% of the population if you consider that no one's getting through adulthood without going through their 20s first. So I bet everybody in here is either in their 20s, the parent of a 20-something, or losing sleep over a 20-something somewhere. So I wrote a book called The Defining Decade for these 50 million 20-somethings, because I believe that every single one of them, especially those without therapists and professors, deserve to know what psychologists, sociologists, neurologists, and fertility specialists know about the power of your 20s and how they will shape your life. Claiming your 20s is one of the simplest but most transformative things you can do for your career, your family, your future, and maybe even the world. This isn't my opinion. These are the facts. 80% of life's most defining moments take place by age 35. 2/3 of lifetime wage growth happens in the first 10 years of a career. More than half of Americans are married or have met their future partner by the age of 30. Your brain caps off its last major growth spurt in your 20s, making this an incredibly important and easy time to change. Personality changes more during your 20s than any time before or after, and female fertility peaks at age 28. So when we think about child development, we all know that the first 5 years are a critical period for language and attachment in the brain. It's a time when your ordinary day-to-day life has an inordinate impact on who you're going to be. But what we hear less about is that there's such a thing as adult development, and our 20s are that critical period for adult development. Forget about give me the boy till he's 7 and I'll show you the man. I work with 20-somethings because it's give me the 20-something and I will show you the man or the woman. But this isn't what 20-somethings are hearing necessarily. You hear, like I did, that 30 is the new 20. You hear that your 20s are an extended adolescence. You hear that doing something later is automatically, in and of itself, the same thing as doing something better. Our 20s have become a sort of Las Vegas in a life cycle, a time when what we do isn't real and when maybe our choices won't count. And as a culture, we have trivialized what are actually the most defining years of our adulthood. Leonard Bernstein said that to achieve great things, you need a plan and not quite enough time. Think about that for a second. So what do you think happens when you look at a 20-something and you pat him or her on the head and you say you have 10 extra years to start your life? Nothing happens. You have robbed that person of his urgency and ambition, and absolutely nothing happens. And then every day, smart, interesting 20-somethings like you, or like your sons and daughters, come into my office and they say things like this. I know my boyfriend is no good for me, but this 4-year relationship doesn't count. I'm just killing time. Or they say, everybody says as long as I get started on a career, by the time I'm 30, I'll be fine. But then it starts to sound like this. My 20s are almost over and I have nothing to show for myself. I had a better resume the day after I graduated from college. And then it starts to sound like this. Dating for me in my 20s was like musical chairs. Everybody was just running around and having fun, but then somewhere around 30, it was like the music turned off and everybody started sitting down. I I didn't want to be the only one left without a chair, so sometimes I think I married my husband because he was the closest chair to me at 30. Don't do that. That's my free advice today. So as kind of silly or as flip as that last one may seem, make no mistakes, the stakes are very high. When a lot has been pushed to your 30s, there's enormous 30-something pressure to jumpstart a career, pick a city, get married, save for college and retirement, and have 2 or 3 kids in a much shorter period of time. Many of these things are incompatible, and as research is just starting to show, simply harder and more stressful to do all at once in your 30s. The post-millennial midlife crisis isn't buying a red sports car or even grilling. It's realizing you can't provide for yourself or your child. It's realizing you can't have a child or give your child a sibling. Too many 30-somethings and 40-somethings look at themselves and at me sitting across the room in my office and say about their 20s, what was I doing? What was I thinking? I work with 20-somethings because I like to change what 20-somethings are doing and thinking. And here's a story about how that can go. It's a story about a woman named Emma. So Emma came to my office when she was about 25. She told me she was having an identity crisis. She said she thought she might like to work in art or entertainment, but she hadn't decided yet, so she'd spent the last few years working in a coffee shop instead. Because it was cheaper, she lived with a boyfriend who displayed his temper more than his ambition. And after a few sessions, she said, I have a confession to make. I think I've come to your office because I think if you could help me get a good job, I have a real reason to leave my boyfriend. You'd be stunned by how many times I've heard that one. So I said what I always say, which was something like, I'd be happy to help you find a good job, but why can't we just break up with your boyfriend now? Not that simple, she said. And as tough as Emma's 20s were, her early life had been even harder. She routinely cried her way through our sessions, and at the end of the hour, she'd sort of dust herself off by saying, you can't pick your family, but you can pick your friends. So one day, Emma came into session, and she hung her head in her lap, and she cried for most of the hour. She had just bought a new address book, and she'd spent the morning filling in her many contacts, but then she was left staring at that empty blank that comes after the words, in case of emergency, please call. She was nearly hysterical when she looked at me and said, who's going to be there for me if I get in a car wreck? Who's going to take care of me if I have cancer? So in that moment, it would have been really easy for me to say, I will. But what Emma really needed wasn't a therapist who really, really cared a lot. Emma needed a better life, and I knew this was her best chance. So over the next weeks and months, I told Emma 3 things that every 20-something deserves to know. One is, forget about having an identity crisis and get some identity capital. By get identity capital, I mean do something that adds value to who you are, inside and out. Do something that says something about who you want to be in 5 or 10 years. No, I'm not discounting exploration here at all, but I am discounting exploration that's not supposed to count, which, by the way, is not exploration. That's procrastination. I told Emma to explore, work, and make it count. These are the years for the cross-country job, the stint in a foreign country, the advanced degree, the startup you want to try. Whatever it is, explore, work, and make it count. I didn't know the future of Emma's career, and no one knows the future of work, but I do know this. Identity capital begets identity capital. And unless you're trying to break into the hospitality industry, which Emma wasn't, working in a coffee shop doesn't have capital. What else did I tell Emma? I told her that the urban tribe is overrated, that best friends are great for giving rides to the airport, but 20-somethings who huddle together with like-minded peers limit who they know, what they know, how they think, how they speak, and where they work. That new piece of capital that Emma needed, that new person to date that Emma needed, almost always comes from outside the inner circle. New things come from what are called our weak ties, our friends of friends of friends of friends. So yes, half of 20-somethings are underemployed, but half aren't. And weak ties are how you get yourself into that group. Half of new jobs are never posted, so reaching out to your neighbor's boss is how you get that unposted job. It's not cheating, it's the science of how information spreads. Last but far from least, Emma believed that you can't pick your family, but you can pick your friends. Now, this was true for her growing up, but as a 20-something, soon she would pick her family when she partnered for someone and created a family of her own. I told Emma that the time to start picking her family was now. Now, you may be thinking that 30 is actually a better time to settle down than 20 or 25, and I agree with you. But making the biggest decision of your life by grabbing whoever you're sleeping with when the save the dates start pouring in is not progress. The best time to work on your marriage is before you have one, and that means taking charge in your 20s, not just of your sexuality, that's easy, but of your relationships as well. It means being as intentional about love as you are about work. Picking your family means consciously choosing who and what you want, rather than just making it work with whoever happens to be choosing you. So what happened to Emma? Well, we went through that address book and we looked at her contacts, and she found an old roommate's cousin who worked in an art museum. That week, Ty helped her get a job there. That job gave her the courage to leave that live-in boyfriend. Now she's a special events planner for museums. She's married to a man who she consciously chose. She loves her new career. She loves her new family. And she sent me a card that said, "Now the emergency contact blanks don't seem big enough." So Emma's story made that sound easy, and I probably shouldn't admit this to everyone here, but that's what I love about working with 20-somethings. They are so easy to help. These are the years when one good conversation, one good break, one good professor, one good class can be the spark that sets a life on fire. My message to 20-somethings everywhere is to reject the common wisdom that your 20s don't matter. Reject the common wisdom that you're content to be played small. It's as simple as what I learned to say to Alex and what I now have the privilege of saying to 20-somethings like Emma every day. 30 is not the new 20, so claim your adulthood, be intentional, get to work, pick your family. Don't be defined by what you didn't know or didn't do. You're deciding your life right now. Thank you.